Welcome to Ashley on CBD, your one-stop podcast where we drop the truth on all things CBD and maybe some pop culture too. Stick around as we delve deep into the practical health benefits of CBD for you.
Welcome to the show. Thank you for listening. Today's episode, as always, is brought to you by Magic Immunity, available at packedwithlife.com. What could be more important in today's world than having a strong immune system? Probably nothing. But how do you do that? Diet, exercise? Well, no kidding. But what I've recently started doing is drinking Magic Immunity. Number one, it tastes great, and it's loaded with healthy nutrients called adaptogens, including 4 essential mushrooms, reishi, lion's mane, chaga, and cordyceps. No, not the magic kind, you guys. Come on. Reishi, lion's mane, chaga, and cordyceps are great for you. Highly nutritious and very adept at boosting your immune system. So give Magic Immunity a try at packedwithlife.com. Today's guest is Dr. Kevin Hoffarth, MD. He's focused on functional medicine in his practice. And in fact, he wrote the book. Functional Medicine is the name of his book. And we'll be talking about his experiences with cannabis and CBD with his patients. So enjoy the show. Thank you. Meet you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Of course.
I'm just starting up this podcast. I've been in the CBD world for quite some time and really got involved really because of an amazing experience that I had personally and changed my life, and have been fortunate enough to be in a position to really help a lot of other people discover the amazing benefits that CBD can provide. And so anyway,
you were the CMO of Charlotte's Web, or still are, right?
I was the founding CMO at Charlotte's Web. Yes.
Okay.
So really, trailblazing at that time when
that was, that was the first company I ever heard of as a physician.
Yeah. It's thank you for that. We did a lot of good things, and a lot of things went our way, and nothing's perfect, but we learned a lot through the way and helped a lot of people. We certainly did that. So that was I've stayed in the industry since that time just for those reasons, because
did you get out of that company specifically, or?
Yep. I moved on and back in 2017, and I've done a couple of other things with some other CBD companies, and also involved in some industrial hemp efforts, and have been recently working in marketing, leading marketing and business development for a THC and CBD company combined here in Colorado, and doing a lot of education and trying to help people spread the word and help people become aware of what this can do for them. So
with your current venture, what's kind of your goal right now? Your steps for starting a podcast and stuff, just the educational part, or are you just
education and awareness. I've been doing this for some time now, and people everybody I find is very curious about CBD. And some people know more than others, but usually when you start talking to folks and you get into it, you get either a reaction of, oh, no way, or something like anti-cannabis, or you get like, oh really, tell me more about that. And so specifically when people find out that their bodies make cannabinoids naturally, and that the U.S. Department of Health has a patent on cannabinoids for antioxidants and neuroprotectants, that generally changes people's opinion, or at least opens them up to say, what? I want to learn more about that.
To a conference and learn for yourself, because it's not one of those things you can just kind of talk about. You got to actually experience it. And after experiencing one conference for a week-long conference, I remember telling my wife, I was like, I don't know anything. I felt like I was back in medical school and trying to kind of restart my understanding of integrative medicine and all the explosion of information that was not really privy to a traditional physician. And I always believed that there was more answers out there, and that what we were doing was good for about 5% of the population, but we were missing a huge chunk of the population, being involved in every area of care. You just kind of realize I've never had a really I wasn't having a lot of wins, I called it, for myself. And a win for me was reversing the disease, not being stuck on medications indefinitely. Their disease actually literally goes away. That to me is a win. And only, a handful of times did I really actually experience that in the traditional world. In the functional world, I experience it regularly. And functional medicine, it's probably the easiest way to describe it is we're talking about the same disease. This is not a new medicine, okay? It's just simply flipping the script. How a physician or provider looks at patients. So rather than starting at the last chapter that we tend to do in patients in traditional world, looking at the disease and the symptoms and the signs and addressing those directly, it's kind of moving backwards in the book and kind of saying, okay, what got them there in the first place? And after doing this for 8 years now, studying, I literally just dove into functional medicine and the integrative world. I literally took every single course you can possibly take. It was kind of insane. And I just kind of went back to being a student, which I love. It's actually my first love anyway, is learning. And, you start, and then you working with hundreds of patients, you start to realize, it's the same beginnings for most people. And it really does come back to the lifestyle component. And so now it's me, my practice is designed to literally just teach people how to get out of their own way. The body is designed beautifully, and it just doesn't function optimally when we get in our own way most of the time. So
that you're looking for from people, because I find that very interesting, just in my own experiences and dealing with myself and others that I know, really having a personal commitment to your own health and betterment is really critical to everything. So tell me more about your experiences there and why you kind of position things that way.
Yeah, it's a great question. I kind of got the idea. When I was saying like flipping the script of how I look at patients, I also flipped the script on what it means to be a doctor. And I started to kind of learn that experience with, the second half of my career. I have a lot of CEOs, and they've kind of taught me, as a physician, how many business classes I took in like all the years of schooling? 0. And they kind of teach you kind of looking at things from their perspective as a company. And I started kind of realizing, it's not any different if a business owner came to me and said, hey, I feel like my business is profitable, but I feel like I could be doing better. And so they hire a consultant, and that consultant comes in and really looks at their business into the details. And it's up to ultimately the CEO to decide if they choose to follow those recommendations or not. And as a physician guide, I see myself as that consultant role now, where I'm literally just looking under the hood of each patient, very detailed. I spend, these days I'm now have an ability to spend 2-3 hours prepping a person's chart before I see them, and then I spend another 2 hours with them. Really get to understand them under the hood and their thinking, because the key is understanding where they're coming from and why they're making their decisions. And then I always put it back on them and say, look, this is only as good as your commitment as well. And I really try to find what each person's absolute motivation is deep under the layers. And then I utilize that to help them move forward and stop making personal excuses for not showing themselves the self-love, the self-care that they deserve, just like they would provide anyone, that their employees, their loved ones, their family members, blah, blah, blah. It's important to also kind of step back and say, look, we need to give you time for you, and and here's what you need to do. You don't need to do X, Y, Z. You just need to do X, and focus on X right now. And this is a commitment, and it's up to you if you decide or not. You're the CEO, not me. I'm just the consultant.
Right. How did you, I guess when you got into this, how did you discover CBD and want to bring that into your conversation with patients?
I have a lot of very savvy patients. I heard, for example, I heard, like I was telling you before, like I heard about Charlotte's Web, and I'm like, what the hell is that?
Mhm.
And, patients would start to kind of tell me, hey, the CBD, and, of course, through the years, coming where I practice, I was in California. So I was there during the time when it was booming, where it was, by the time I left Tahoe, I mean, 2 years earlier, no THC shops. After I left a small town of like 20,000, there was like 5 stores, just in my little town. And so, California obviously was one of the first to really kind of open the door to the discussion of THC, which then obviously led to the opening the door to CBD. And
Mhm.
pain, colleagues, my pain specialists, they're, what would they traditionally say is to me is, it's amazing. I throw in all these opiates to my patients, and fentanyl patches, and stimulators and all this, and what seems to work better than anything is good old cannabinoids.
Mhm.
um, and so you start to listen and hear, and I see every single patient as an opportunity for me to learn, and that's how that door opened, 5-6 years ago now. And I started to study it and started to realize, hey, there's something to this. I keep hearing the same story over and over again. My anxiety is better, my sleep is better. Sleep is probably the one I really hear a lot about. I hear a lot of people, my patients, they're the patients I deal with now are type AAA kind of guys and girls. And so their mind's constantly going, and they got so much going upstairs, they can't seem to settle themselves down.
Mhm.
And that CBD really helps them kind of get out of their own head and fall to sleep and stay asleep. To me, that's such an important aspect that that leads into kind of what we're seeing across the world right now with the whole COVID thing. Definitely, a lot of people, the anxiety and the sleep seems to be a constant discussion that I've been having on a daily basis right now.
Yeah, let's talk more about the sleep. I know that that's
Yeah.
in my experience, that's the first thing that people seem to experience when they start getting involved with cannabinoids or CBD. Um, everybody, even if that's not what they're pursuing, it seems in my
Mhm.
experience, the first thing people say is, I've noticed I'm sleeping better.
Mhm.
So tell me about your experiences with that, what you've seen.
Well, again, as a traditional physician, I've kind of gone through the gamut over 20 years. I've learned this process from all walks and demonstrations. So obviously, as a traditional doc, you learn to utilize medications first. Okay, the Ambiens, the Valiums, the Benadryls, the melatonins on some level. Okay, but in traditional world, that was even a little bit alternative,
Mhm.
which is kind of silly now when I think back. And then the Lunestas, and there's a whole variety of uh, pharmaceutical medications. And it's interesting because taking Ambien, for example, that was a very powerful medication that works well. But of course, then you hear the gamut. As a physician, I would hear all sorts of stories like, oh my gosh, my 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 mom woke up in the middle of the night, was just sleepwalking through on the streets, and totally confused. uh, you hear enough of those stories, and it wasn't like everybody, but you hear enough of those stories, and frankly, as a physician, you know one important rule is, when people ask you, is there a side effect to a medication, I say
Mhm.
absolutely. And anything can happen. There's a reason why there's this Bible called the PDR that has every single side effect that can happen on a medication. And it becomes, and we're expected as physicians, we're not pharmacists, to understand and appreciate this? Well, when you practice medicine for long enough, you see that, most people do well, but if you're 10-15% of your population is having pretty serious problems, that's a problem. That's not a good number in in stats. And so you start to look for other alternatives. CBD, I don't hear now on any level of offering CBD to people who are having sleep issues as a tool to help them in their sleep challenges. Is it for everyone? Absolutely not, but it definitely helps for a fairly large segment of my population who suffer from anxiety or just emotionally driven stress, emotional thoughts that they can't shut down. And it doesn't leave them groggy in the mornings. That's another thing that's, I hear, oh yeah, I slept great with this particular sleep aid, but now I'm like, I'm exhausted the next morning because I feel groggy from it. I get that way personally. I get that way from Tylenol PM, which is basically Benadryl. I feel shot for 3-4 hours after I wake up. I can feel
Right.
the effects. And fortunately, I don't really have a sleep issue. Every once in a while, you just take one just because you feel like you kind of need it. But yeah, it's when you're talking about the body, and this is where I think functional medicine, I love how I was kind of more in tune to think, is that nothing that's made by the body is all bad or all good. Well, what is one of the systems that's built into us is the cannabinoid system. Well, I find it so fascinating that there's all these plants throughout our earth that connect with our body. I mean, if you really think about it, it's kind of like, oh, there is a very systematic design here.
Yep.
And, I'm speaking to the guy, but who understands that, the cannabis plant and the cannabis sativa L, which is the hemp plant, very similar names, a little bit different in different distributions of cannabinoids. But all these cannabinoids, which we don't even know all the names of all of them, and we don't know the impacts of all of them, but we do know that we have a cannabinoid system that desires balance. Okay. And our body is just simply looking for a balance, which we always call in science homeostasis. But I like to kind of see it as we have this massive military defense operating system. It's called our immune system. And it's protecting us and repairing us at every second, at every moment. Otherwise, without it, we'd all die from paper cuts.
Right.
And the cannabinoid system is just one little layer, okay, of a much larger supercomputer that's helping keep this system in check. And sleep, I always try to remind my patients, there is a reason there's a lot of literature on sleep. The more that's written about something, the less they know about it. There's a lot of thoughts and hypotheses, but it's usually the more literature, the less they know. And as a practicing clinician, sleep is challenging because it can be affected by so many different pathways, blood sugars, alcohol, stress, pain, anxiety, and then there's that gamut of patients where you can't really put your finger on it. The beauty of CBD, I have found, I don't think it's the end all to all things, okay, but I do find that from a sleep perspective, since we're talking about that, it's a great starting point for a lot of my patients. And so many of my patients will say, wow, I'm so glad you kind of suggested this. I was really mixed, and you're hearing this a lot less these days, but 5-10 years ago, it was interesting. It was the discussion of CBD was like the discussion of COVID right now. Okay. There's these two divisive camps. Okay. And, do I wear masks? The anti-maskers, the maskers, all these, it's just this weird divisional thing going on. Well, I felt like that's the way it was with CBD for a while. I feel like it's definitely not in that realm anymore, in that camp. I do feel like most of my patients are very open to discussing it now. And they're like, huh, even my father, who's a physician, very old school. I have him on CBD, and he was like, I mean, anti-marijuana. That he was in that camp for a long time, and now he grows older, quite a bit older. He's 82 now, and has aches and pains and sleeping, and all the stuff that it's just joy to get older with. He finds CBD extremely helpful, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, this stuff is great." I'm shocked. In his own words, as a stoic man who grew up in the 50s and 60s, he was like, "Gosh, I wish I wasn't so divisive in my thinking,
Right.
of this topic."
Yeah, it's interesting. You bring up something that I've talked to a lot of people about over the years as well, which is, whether you believe in God or you don't, and you believe in evolution, either we were designed to consume these plants, as you suggest, or at minimum, we've been consuming them and have been around them in very close consumption for millions, if not billions of years. So either one of those two realities would lead one to believe that these are very beneficial compounds for us, right? And only in the last 100 years, roughly, have we gotten away from that and demonized them for other political reasons, clearly, and probably also for reasons that would enable medicinal pharmaceutical companies to develop things that they can intellectually property, they can have intellectual property that they can own. But we won't digress into all of that. But I did find what you're saying about the time of in the living together in close proximity between people and plants for so long. That's something that I think also helps people really be optimistic and hopeful that this could do something for them positively.
Yeah, I think as you get it more into, you bring up some layers there, and as a trained traditional allopathic physician, you're trained to think very one-sided, and you start to realize over time, and it's really working with patients, you start to realize the limitation of that. It has its place. I'm not here to bash all allopathic docs, because by any means, no, I think there's some great components to it.
Sure.
But if we open our minds and start to realize that we're not medicine deficient, we are balance deficient, we are lifestyle choice deficient. People love to say, "Oh, it runs in my genes," and I like to remind you, no, bad habits run in your genes.
Yeah, good for you. I agree. No room for excuses.
Yeah, and so the CBD, that whole conversation really opens up a lot of windows and doors of, obviously there's many layers we could go into, the whole politics and the economics and all that stuff. But when it comes down to patient care, individual care, I like to choose things that work, that have minimal to no side effects. Nothing has zero side effects. I've learned that anyone can have anything, but it's not one of those things that keeps you up at night. CBD is not one of those ones I worry about. And the thing is with CBD, for me, a small amount does a lot. For my wife, takes a fairly large amount. She has Irish genes in her. She can knock through alcohol like there's no tomorrow too, without really feeling experience. So everyone has a little bit detox and breakdown systems. But regardless of that variability, I don't see people reporting to me serious complications, or, really there's not a lot of, there are certain medications and supplements. Of course, you got to be aware of interaction. But they're pretty few and far between in your physician. If they do some kind of level of research, they'll be able to guide their patient.
Right. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, in today's world, especially, with COVID and, this the lunacy that we're experiencing all the way around, I'm even personally feeling stressed and anxious,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like I've got a pretty good hold on myself in that regard in a lot of ways. But are you seeing more patients coming in with or Zooming or whatever you're able to do with them these days to talk to you about stress and anxiety?
So you bring up a really great question that you just got me thinking about a topic that I was just recently writing about. So in all my years of working with men's health, for example, I work with men and women, but working specific men, I would always joke with my men that it would take a Mack truck to destroy most men's libido. And interestingly, I think in the last 6 months, literally 50% of my guys, regardless of their age, are reporting a low libido. And I really think this pandemic is the Mack truck.
Wow.
And to me, it's speaking volumes of how much it's impacting people who are like saying, oh, well, you always hear the term, well, I know it's not, the people are almost like trying to forgive themselves for even trying to complain about it, because they're like, well, I have a job and I'm not stressed financially because of this, and I feel really bad for the people. And you hear this like beginning caveat, but then there's the layers like, well, but my kid and my other kid is in remote school, and we're trying to have everybody in the house, and then my wife and I we're around each other a lot more, and she's getting sick of me, and all these different little layers
Mm-hmm.
is completely throwing off, for example, in just this scenario, men. And some of these men that I work with, they're used to traveling a little bit. So they have like their little getaway in terms of just being around.
Breath of fresh air, right?
Yeah. And they don't have it. And, they're trying to be stoic and say, oh, I'm fine. But then they're just describing, I have no libido.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that speaks volumes. And they're just saying to me, there is the layers. It's anxiety, maybe not the superficial anxiety that a lot of people describe, or depression and things like that, but mental health, okay, comes out in all sorts of ways. Frankly, I think it comes out in a lot of things that people don't, they don't want to say, oh, I'm anxious or I'm depressed.
Right.
They would much easier say, I'm having a hard time sleeping, or my libido, it's got to be my testosterone. Okay.
Right.
Or, they want to blame it on something else, but really when it comes down to it, it's up here. And, that endocannabinoid system is, there's the CB1s that are in the brain, and then there's the CB2s that are more periphery. And, that's the beauty of CBD versus THC, is it kind of impacts both those pathways really well. And from, at least from the science that we understand, and it's helping to regulate that overall balance in the brain of neurotransmitters as well. It's such a complex computer that trying to just say this causes this, it never works. But yet patients like to think binary, and physicians like to do it because it's nice to go, this medication will help this. And I always like to remind people that we're a big chicken web. The body's a big chicken web, and everything is kind of interconnected, and CBD just provides a little bit of extra balance.
Mm-hmm. No, this is great. I'm so glad to hear you, and I'm encouraged by what you're talking to your patients about, because I don't generally don't generally get the feeling that there's a lot of openness to the concepts, by physicians that you're talking through, and approaching these things holistically. You're talking about adding something that's natural, and it's actually, a supplement that your body's already making. Do you ever get into conversations about nutrition or meditation? I mean, those types of things, because it seems like that would be the
Yes.
next logical evolution of what you're trying to counsel your patients.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're just talking about CBD right now, but
Yeah.
Every patient who works with me is sick and tired of me bringing up kitchen and meditation.
Right.
Matter of fact, a book that I wrote recently, it's called Functional Medicine, the New Standard. I talk about the 5 STAMP triggers. So STAMP, and the 2 bookends, stress as the S, and
Okay.
and P, the poor diet, okay, has to do with cortisol and insulin. And I always tell people that if until you heal these two pathways, you heal nothing. And so I put enormous amount of energy into the kitchen. I always call it the kitchen. I don't like diets. I don't like the names. I don't give a shit if someone's paleo or vegan or
Right.
carnivore. I don't get caught up on that. You know, as far as stress, stress can come in, manifest in multiple ways. It's one I believe that the CBD is a good conversation during this pandemic, because anxiety is a form of stress, and lack of sleep is a form of stress, and then you have those, then it exacerbates the pain pathways. So my chronic pain patients now have more stress, and then they're like, okay, what's the chicken or the egg? And I'm like, it doesn't really matter. Okay, frankly, we just need to clinically give you some tools to help you break these cycles. And that's, when you're talking about open-mindedness, I was that doc, okay, who was closed-minded in the first half of my career because it was not taught me.
Right.
It was,
Right.
you get into this world, and I think, kind of the swing when I first got into medicine was evidence-based medicine. Everything had to have a study. I mean, when I was in residency and the years after, it was like we'd get together as physicians and talk about something, but it had to have a study to support it. And after a while, you start to go, well, God, we can't study everything, okay? And these are population studies. What about the individual? Because they don't mesh in true clinical medicine. Book and real life don't always perfectly mesh. We want to perfectly mesh them, but they don't. And so you kind of got to go, wait a minute here. I'm not working with a robot. I'm working with a human being who's got a life, who's got all sorts of shit going on around them. Okay. And I have to be open to their world. And you asked me, okay, about getting people involved. I try to find out, how involved are you going to be with me and me with you? Okay. I got to know your level of commitment here, because if you're just going to make excuse, and think I'm going to give you some magic bullet, I always tell them I'm not a magician. Okay. My magical powers is being able to see into your weak links and helping guide you to figure out those are the places I have to focus on. I don't have to, be caught up on this whole mesh of everything. And, not everybody has to do a mold detox, and not everybody has to do, whatever over here. We gotta get focused. And the focus almost always starts in the kitchen. Every patient who works with me, I tell them a little motto. I say, health starts and ends in the kitchen every single time. If you get stuck, go back to the kitchen.
Yeah, that's great advice. What are you? I love it. What is? You mentioned the stamp. I don't want you to go into your entire book, right?
No,
and
no.
give it all away, but I love that idea. Tell us a little bit more about the what the other letters mean.
So, yes, stressors. T for toxins, like alcohol, tobacco, drugs, or environmental toxins. A for allergens. So it could be like in Austin area, we have a lot of cedar, but that's not the one I'm talking about. I'm talking about like food sensitivities, for example. M stands for microbes. Now, in today's world, we're thinking is COVID, but really in reality, it's more like parasites and viruses and Lyme disease and things like that go a little bit more occult and affect health from a very, less obvious manner. And then poor diet.
Right.
And these are the 5 triggers or major war powers that can really start to impact our immune system's defense system, and then lead to inflammation or lead to autoantibody mistakes, and then lead to disease eventually.
Well, what I really like about what your philosophy is representing is you're empowering people to basically not have to come see you, right? Which is an interesting thing, and that's I think very admirable, and I think that should be the objective of all physicians and people that are involved in medications and trying to help rehabilitate people from whatever they may be working toward. So I commend you for that, and I'm excited that you're doing that, because it gives me new faith in a situation where, like you mentioned, you weren't taught about the endocannabinoid system, right? And there's, unfortunately, physicians, they're still not taught about that in medical school, which to me is just a travesty. But of course, they're not really taught about nutrition and the importance of that either. So it's really quite bizarre to me. But thank you for doing what you're doing. And is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Because this has been fascinating to me, and I'd love to. I'm going to definitely check out your book and learn more about what you're up to there. But is there anything else you want to share with us before we wrap?
Yeah, I do think there is a real push by physicians on a general rule, a lot of traditional docs who are really seeing the light and are getting enlightened by their patients. And the world of functional medicine, you can just go to instituteoffunctionalmedicine.org, and that's who I started my process with. And if people are looking for a physician in their area, start there. And that's and I do think the shift is happening. So be encouraged. Docs are not the enemy. I think sometimes it gets into oh, they are trying to be this divisional person. They're not. They're just going with what they've been taught and know, and are trying to do the best that they know how. And and the good ones are students for life, and the bad ones are not. And that's with every field.
True. That's life, right?
So just look for the one that's always asking the questions.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for being
welcome.
on Ashley on CBD. I really appreciate you joining us, and I look forward to meeting you somewhere down the road. I'm sure our travels will cross somewhere again. So thank you so much for what you're doing, and you have a great day.
You too. Thank you very much.
Take care. Thank you for listening to today's show. Always brought to you by Magic Immuna Tea, available at packedwithlife.com. A mushroom tea that tastes great. Try it. Magic Immuna Tea, packedwithlife.com.